Welcome in, listener. You're listening to a segment from the Slumpbuster podcast with Ju-Ju and Dre. Find the full episode on Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play Store, or our YouTube channel. Enjoy.
Obviously, I was rooting for Team USA. I think USA's seen better days when it comes to basketball.
Yeah, so let's talk about these games. Let's jump into it. So just clarify, so this is just the World Cup, which our players don't seem to take as seriously as the Olympics, but even still, it's always disappointing when the U.S. team doesn't really show out. So in this tournament, they lost to not only the French, but then they followed that up with a disappointing loss to Serbia, too, where they were just getting ran out the building at a certain point. They were down 32-7 in that game against the Serbs, but against the French. So this game was tied at 76 with 3:40 left to go in the fourth quarter, and then the French just ran away with it. They were led by a combination of Rudy Gobert with 21 points, 16 rebounds, and then you also had some contributions from Fournier, Neil Quinta, and Batum. And yeah, it just led to a disappointing tournament for the U.S. team. So what do you kind of make of this?
Yeah, so we've talked about it before, and this was definitely one of the weaker USA teams, right? So we've talked about some of the reasons for that being, a lot of the stars are probably looking forward to the season, right? They're playing with their teams and their guys because they're trying to win an NBA championship, especially because it's so open this year. So you have guys like Anthony Davis is on a new team, right, with the Lakers. He doesn't want to play in Team USA. Kawhi Leonard, right, and Paul George, they're probably out of it because, they think they have a shot with the Clippers. And even some of our young talents, there's some guys that I question why they're not playing, right, like a Devin Booker. And I'm not calling, Booker out necessarily, but his team doesn't really have a shot at winning, right? It might have been a good experience for him. But we knew this was going to be a weaker team, so I wasn't too surprised by some of the losses.
I mean, you don't want to call Booker out, but I'm going to call Booker out. I'm going to call De'Aaron Fox out, Marvin Bagley, all our young guys who decided to bail out on this tournament. I understand it's a half-court time a year for a lot of them, but at the same time, it's like, again, the league MVP was in this tournament. Jokic, who's on a team that's arguably a title contender, was in this tournament and playing. You had a bunch of other guys who are going to be on winning franchises this year, and then you have guys, like we mentioned, a Devin Booker or De'Aaron Fox, who are maybe fringe playoff teams that we don't even know if they're going to be competing for a title, and they decided up and bail on this tournament. And it's going to be interesting to see whenever this team goes to the 2020 Olympics, whether or not Jerry Colangelo is so inclined to even invite those guys back. I think he has to, just because we're struggling for talent. I was watching The Jump the other day, and Rachel Nichols brought up a great point, and I think it's true. So when you look at our under 25 talent right now in the USA, we're not providing the best guys right now. It's clear that the best guys are not coming from the U.S. right now. I mean, no disrespect to Donovan Mitchell, no disrespect to Jason Tatum, but when you look at what we're going up against with a Giannis, with a Jokic, with all these guys, they are far superior talents, or at least more NBA ready by the time they come to us.
So that's actually kind of interesting, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit. I think that LeVar Ball, right, of all people to bring up on sports shows, but LeVar Ball, he didn't go about things the right way, but he's thought about, hey, I want to do something different with my boys, right, to get them into the NBA. So he took them out of college. And a lot of people laughed in his face, which I agree. I thought it was sort of a bad decision, a bad idea. I didn't think he should have gone that way. But I think you're right. There is something to, hey, some of these foreign leagues are starting to develop some pretty good talent, right? Like Luka Doncic was one of them. You named Jokic, right? And quite a few other people. And so I think we do have to start paying attention to international competition a little bit more. And I wonder if we start to see even more scouts going overseas and trying to bring in more foreign players.
Now, do you think that we can bring in the A team for the 2020 Olympics? Do you think guys who are going to be disappointed by this loss might gear up a little bit more? Like we could bring in a Harden or a Westbrook, or guys that decided to bail on the World Cup tournament?
I definitely think we can. Like I said, to me, I think a lot of this is this sort of season right now for the NBA is a lot of people's best chance at winning a title, right? So you don't have your juggernaut like your Golden States anymore, and it's a little bit more open. It becomes a little bit less open when you start getting some of these injured players back, right? So you get Klay Thompson back, Kevin Durant will be back after that. And so with then, I think the league starts to close a little bit, and we might see some of our star players, especially the ones that don't have a shot anymore, possibly playing for Team USA. And I think there is something to be motivated, right? We went from being undefeated for 58 straight games to now we lost, 3 essentially, if you include the sort of scrimmage that we had against Australia, but definitely 2, and to not even place in the top 3 in the world, which I had thought we were probably favored to win the entire thing. But like I'd said earlier, I wasn't going to be surprised if we lost in the semis or something. But to only finish top 10 and not even in the top 7 is a little bit disappointing.
I'm kind of disappointed, though, with like the excuses that a lot of like the media is making for this team as a whole. Now, this team definitely had a flawed roster. With the late withdrawals, the injuries, they lost a lot of their depth at like the guard position. But even more so, they didn't really have a like outstanding big man. I think that showed against a team like France with a Rudy Gobert, who had 21 points and 16 rebounds in that game. And Jokic didn't have the biggest game in the world, but he was still a factor. That Serbian team was one of the more lanky, tall teams in the tournament, and that's why I think they just got beat up on so hard in that game. So it's going to be interesting to see how they really rectify that, like moving forward, get more size on this team. I don't know who you really add right now, as there's not really an outstanding American big man.
Yeah, there's really not. I think LeBron's, obviously taken a step backwards, and even him, he's more of a small forward, power forward. I thought Anthony Davis can be a really good 4-5 guy, but Anthony Davis has come out and said, hey, I don't really like to play the 5, right? And so I think you're right. I think there are some holes in sort of our big men for the United States. Al Horford's pretty good defensively, so we'll see how. I'm actually excited to see how he matches up with Jokic. But yeah, you're right. There's not a whole lot of good bigs that I think can compete with some of the other international big guys that are out there. Now, something that I will say too when we get back to the losses is the Serbia loss. I'm very disappointed in it, though I'm not surprised. I think a lot of times what happens, especially in tournament play, is you're really hoping to get to the finals or whatever, and then you lose, right, in the semis or something, and then after that you're sort of depressed and you lose another game, and it's very easy to sort of fall into a lull. So I had thought that was the risk with Serbia, whereas everybody else is still gunning to be the best, whereas USA, we had thought, hey, we have a shot at another world championship, right, another world title, and then you lose. All your players are sort of down in the dumps, whereas Serbia, for them, this is still a very important game for all of those players. And so I'm not super surprised that we went on to actually lose again. It is disappointing, though.
Well, I mean, it's obvious you're right. They did come back, not necessarily in the right mindset to play that game against Serbia. I mean, when you start off with the first quarter ending in 32-7, it's clear you're not in the right mental state. Mm-hmm. And they obviously weren't taking that game as seriously, too, when you just look at the minutes played. The only player that exceeded 30 minutes in that game was Kemba Walker. And he had 18 points in that game. Not a bad day at the office, but Harrison Barnes led this team, which, no disrespect to Harrison, but he would have not really had 28 minutes of play on past USA team rosters.
Hey, going back to the big man thing real quick, do you know what team Joel Embiid is playing for? Because I know he's not from the U.S., but I don't know if he would even play on a U.S. team. So that's another big man, right, that we potentially
but I also do think that the Sixers in particular probably would step in with someone like Embiid, who has a huge injury history, and not want him to necessarily waste minutes in the offseason, quote unquote, waste the minutes. I think it's important still, but really the league doesn't feel the same way.
Yeah, and it is one of those weird things where the NBA, right, is so important that it sort of outweighs the world championships, right? And like we were talking about earlier, is that NBA championships to most of these guys means a whole lot more than a world or an Olympic championship. So that's a good point.
Well, it's just a disappointing week all around. Do you have kind of like any more that you want to touch on with this team?
No, I don't think so. I am glad to see, some of our young guys get out there and play. And so I commend those guys. I think we are being a little bit tough, right? Like, hey, I'm just glad these guys went out and competed, still represented us well, but it was disappointing. And that's pretty much all I could say.
Yeah, they sacrificed their summer. Popovich said it in the post-game press conference too, that we do have to celebrate the guys who did decide to show up. It's so glaring at all the guys who decided not to show up. It's hard not to notice when you saw this team perform on the court.